Today, we are reading quite a few interesting things. I could talk about the encouragement to discipline as the only way of approaching wisdom from Sirach. I could talk about the interesting part of the epistle to the Ephesians, which has to do with wives, submit to your husbands, but husbands, love your wives as Christ loved his church, giving up his life for her. But instead, what occurs to me is what will probably occur to you, my students, and that is this. But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. He said, why should your anger burn against your people? Moses is talking to God. Remember, God wants to destroy his people, the Israelites, because, backstory, he has brought them out of Egypt. He has saved them. He has rescued them. And the first thing they do when they get the chance is start worshiping false gods, knowing that they're false. So he's had it, and he's going to wipe them all out, as he did with Noah and the flood, when he saved Noah but wiped out everybody else. Moses steps in between and says, Lord, why should your anger burn against your people whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, it was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger. Relent and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. See, I think this is more interesting than any of those other readings. It's going to make my students say to me, what? God is angry like a human being, and he is convinced to change his mind? He repents? He turns away from doing something that might have been evil because Moses talks to him? Well, here's where it helps to back away a bit and recognize that we can't really talk about God directly. We have to use a language of symbolism, a language of mythology, a language of metaphor. We can't really deal with the mystery of existence without doing that. We're always using some sort of analogy to talk about God, who is beyond all these things. But also put yourself in the emotional position that this story conveys. I don't know if you've ever been in a position where you've had somebody that you really, really had to beat or prove something to, so that if you lost, everybody would make fun of you. Maybe you put your whole heart into a political campaign, or you put everything into taking a risk, and people say, oh, you're crazy, it's not going to work. And then it doesn't work. And you know they're going to say, oh, you were crazy, I told you so. Everything that happens in getting the Israelites out of Egypt, these awful Egyptians who were merely enslaving them, Pharaoh, who kept saying he'd let them go and then relenting, well, now that they've escaped, crossed the Red Sea, and now that the horse and his rider, the chariot and the rider, have been drowned in the waves, now if God wipes out the Israelites, what are the Egyptians going to say? Well, oh yeah, he might have been a really good God. He got him out. Why did he get him out? He wanted to squish him like a bug. That's why he got him out. It would undo the whole glory and pride of the story. Not only that, Moses reminds God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he calls Jacob Israel, which was Jacob's new name, reminding God, so to speak, reminding in quotes. God doesn't forget things. But how do we operate? We forget things, so that when we're reminded of something, if for instance, you're tempted to do something particularly bad and somebody reminds you of a promise you made to your mother, Or maybe you've got a boyfriend or a girlfriend and you're really tempted to cheat, but somebody reminds you of what your boyfriend or girlfriend means to you and the special times you spent together or anything like that. This calls up again and makes real and makes present all those stories from last year, if you took this class last year, all the stories from Genesis, the call of Abraham, Isaac almost sacrificed, but then spared at the last moment. Jacob and the incredible adventure of Jacob's obstreperousness, his willingness to lie, his trickiness, and how he had to be himself morally revived. He had a kind of a metanoia. Jacob had to become Israel. In the midst of all these things that were threatening him, he becomes the father of his people, and his name changes. And then, of course, Joseph and the brothers, and Joseph gets thrown into all these adventures. They all happened because God had chosen this special group of people that he loved, beginning with Abraham, who loved God. It was a reciprocal thing. And if you remember from last year, from reading Genesis, I kept getting the comments, why does God stick with these people? Look at how Abraham behaves. He lies about Sarah, claiming that she's his sister and not his wife. And, you know, and look at what Jacob does. And he tricks his brother and he steals his birthright. And now, why does God have patience? Look at what the brothers do when they give Joseph over and they're ready to kill him, but they're instead convinced to simply sell him into slavery. And you kept saying to me what God is saying to Moses. Why should I put up with any more of this? Now, if you ever feel that way about life, if you ever feel that way about anything you're trying to do, even your schoolwork or your family, life can be hard. And there are times when you want to say, to heck with it. I've had it. I'm not fighting the fight anymore. I give up. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. I'm not going to try to be good, or whatever the temptation is. We need someone like a Moses. Now, again, God is not necessarily experiencing these things. It's almost our way of saying, we would experience this, and he must experience something greater. There's nothing that we experience or that we have in our capacity that he doesn't first have or experience. And so even though we know God does not really operate this way, it's not wrong to tell this story about him, especially when you look at the role of Moses. Moses says to him, if you do this, your choice of this people as your special spouse, in a sense, that choice will be annulled, abrogated. You'll be made fun of. And think of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Israel himself, Israel itself. He calls to mind the love God has for us. Now, with that in mind, I think I really do want to look at least the very end of what we see in the reading from St. Paul. So, and the reason I want to look at this is not the fact that when we hear it in Mass, it's often bracketed because we're scared to death to offend and be politically incorrect. But recognize it's not just saying that women should simply obey their husbands and be little toadies saying yes to them at all times. It's saying that it's reciprocal. The husbands must love their wives as Christ loved his church. Why? Because this whole arrangement of marriage, at the end here, Paul says, this is a profound mystery. But I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and his church. The fundamental image in the Bible as a whole is the image of marriage, I would say. It's the image of fidelity that we have in a marriage, where you must be true to one another even when you don't feel like it, and even when you can't remember For instance, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When you can't remember why you love your wife, you must still exercise the love of your wife and the fidelity to her. Paul is talking about the mystery of the union of Jesus Christ and his church, which is not complete until the end of time. So Paul is saying that human marriage is a sign that points to this, is an analogy of it. And in the same way, I think we can say that the scene between Moses and God, when God wants to destroy the Israelites, is similar. It's an argument in a marriage. I don't know if your moms and dads have arguments in front of you, but let me tell you something. We certainly have in front of our kids. It's a spat. It's a lover's spat because love demands higher things from us. It certainly demands higher things from the Israelites. They should not, as soon as they doubt Moses' return from the mountain, immediately go prostituting themselves after false gods. That's obvious. So that God's response is actually quite understandable and just. But Moses stands in as a kind of Christ figure. Christ mediates the worthlessness of us sinners and the complete worthiness of God. He somehow brings the two into communication. He functions not only as a marriage counselor, you might say, but ultimately as the bridegroom. All that stuff is going on pretty much in every passage you read from the Bible. How about that?